Hi, my name's Meg. On Christmas Eve, I woke up choking on smoke, trapped in my childhood bedroom, and the last thing I saw before passing out was my sister locking the door from the outside. They held a funeral, for me, while I was still alive. Since then, they've erased me from photos, forged my name on legal documents, and told the world I never mattered. But what hurts more than the fire is knowing they'd planned it for years, down to the insurance, the inheritance, the silence. So here's my question. What would you do if the people meant to love you the most decided your existence was the problem? And how far would you go to take your name back? I woke to smoke. Thick, sharp, suffocating. It wasn't a dream. This wasn't the burning scent of someone overcooking dinner or a fireplace left roaring too long. No, this was deeper, toxic. I coughed hard, my chest tightening with every breath I tried to take. The room was dim, shadows dancing on the walls as the glow of orange flickered underneath my bedroom door. My first instinct was to reach for my phone. It wasn't on the nightstand. Panic started to settle in my throat. I stumbled out of bed, feet bare against the cold wood floor, and rushed to the door. It was hot to the touch. "Mom!" I screamed, my voice already hoarse. "Isolde!" No answer. I twisted the doorknob. It wouldn't budge. I yanked, pushed, slammed my shoulder against it. Nothing. My heart pounded louder than the cracking wood behind me. I turned to the window, trying to steady my breath, but the air was thick, like trying to inhale molasses. Then, through the smoke and the blur, I saw movement outside the window, figures on the front lawn, a cluster of people, neighbors, and then her, Isolde, standing there, in her thick winter coat, hands tucked into her pockets, not screaming, not crying, not moving, just watching. My eyes locked with hers, and I expected panic, urgency, anything. But she didn't flinch, didn't even step forward. Her gaze was cold, still, unfazed. That's when I heard it. A voice, muffled but unmistakable, just outside my door. "Just stay quiet. Let it happen." Isolde. It was her voice. I froze. Was she talking to someone else? Was she talking to me? My knees buckled. The floor beneath me pulsed with heat. Something behind the door snapped with a crack, and a gust of smoke surged in. I screamed again, fists pounding against the door. "Please! Somebody help me! I'm still in here!" But they were already walking away. The flames crept into the corners. My lungs screamed. My vision tunneled. The last thing I remember before blacking out was the way her eyes had looked through that glass, blank, distant, as if I were a stranger. When I opened my eyes, the world was white. Ceiling tiles, beeping monitors, a tube in my arm, another in my nose. I couldn't move. And my skin burned beneath the layers of bandages. Breathing hurt. "She's awake," a voice said. A nurse came into view. She smiled, but it was laced with pity. "You gave us quite a scare," she said gently. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. Just a raspy gasp. "You're safe now. Try not to talk." She patted my arm and walked away. Days passed. Maybe weeks. Doctors came and went, explaining burns, surgeries, rehab. 40% of my body, gone, scarred. They said it was a miracle I survived. What they didn't say, what I learned in silence, was that no one had come for me. Not a single visitor, no flowers, no family. I was invisible. The nurses whispered when they thought I was asleep. "She's got no one," one of them said. Mother said she passed? It made no sense. Then the social worker came, a clipboard in her hand, a cautious kindness in her eyes. "Hi, Meg," she said, sitting beside my bed. "I want to talk with you about next steps, when you're ready." I blinked at her. "Your family," she hesitated. "They've made arrangements, but there's something we need to go over." She pulled out a document, a death certificate. My name, my birth date, the date of the fire listed as the day I died. "Your mother," she continued softly, "believed you didn't survive. She filed this 3 days after the incident." 3 days? I stared at the paper, fingers trembling. That's when I asked for a laptop. I couldn't sit up properly yet, but I propped it against my knees, ignoring the pain. My hands shook as I logged into social media. My heart thudded, slower now. Not panic, just something colder. I searched for my mother's page. There she was, Vera Brooks, still active. Photos from Christmas Day. The same year. My sister smiling wide, holding a glass of wine. A full dining table behind her. My mother in her favorite sweater, setting the turkey down with a grin. There was a family photo. My seat, my place at the end of the table, was empty. They didn't even Photoshop me in. I wasn't dead. I'd been erased. They went on, celebrated, laughed, tagged each other, wrote captions like, "Cherish the ones you love most." Isolde had commented under one picture, "Best holiday in years." I closed the laptop and let it fall off my lap. My head pounded. My breath caught in my chest, not from the burns, not anymore, but from something deeper, not forgotten, discarded like trash, like a problem finally solved. The next morning, I screamed, not from pain, but rage. The nurse ran in, followed by a doctor. I shoved the blankets aside, uncaring of the pain, the exposed skin. "They tried to kill me," I rasped. "Meg," the doctor said calmly, "you've suffered trauma. It's normal to feel disoriented." "They did this!" I screamed. She looked me in the eye and walked away. They sedated me. The next few days blurred together. I spoke less. I listened more. I thought more. When I was finally allowed to sit outside in a wheelchair, the sunlight didn't warm me. It felt foreign. But that's when I made the vow. If they buried me, I'd claw my way out. If they lied, I'd show the truth. I was done being silent, done being the difficult one, the sister who never fit the mold. I'd come back, not just to exist, but to make sure they'd never sleep peacefully again. Back in my hospital room that night, I looked at the mirror mounted above the sink. The woman staring back at me was swollen, burned, bandaged. But her eyes were clear, not angry, not even hurt anymore, sharp, purposeful. "You want me gone?" I whispered. "Let's see what happens if I come back." By the time the bus pulled into Savannah, the sky had shifted into that gray shade that doesn't tell you if it's about to rain or just stay gloomy for the rest of the day. I stepped off slowly, backpack snug against my side, hoodie drawn tight around my face. Nobody paid attention. I looked like any tired traveler, and that's exactly how I needed it to be. The social worker had given me a copy of the cemetery records before I left the hospital. Coordinates, plot number, and a printed note, "Memorial site, unclaimed burial." That alone had chilled me more than the fire ever had. I caught a cab and gave the driver the address without meeting his eyes. When he asked if I was visiting family, I nodded once and said, "Something like that." The cemetery was older than I remembered. Moss hung from tree limbs like forgotten scarves. The gate creaked, and even the air felt heavier inside. Rows of gravestones, cracked and weathered, lined the main path. No flowers, no visitors, just silence and the faint rustle of leaves brushing against headstones. I walked slowly, following the coordinates like I was tracing a crime scene. Then I saw it. A simple slab, low to the ground, under a crooked oak. The stone looked new, too new compared to the others. Clean, polished, without adornments. Just a name etched in thick, robotic font. Margaret Eliza Brooks. December 9th, 1989. December 24th, 2019. Wrong middle name. Wrong date. Right enough to make it sting. They didn't even spell it right. My middle name was Elaine, not Eliza. A mistake only someone detached would make. Someone rushing to finalize a lie. I stood still. My fingers curled into my palms. There it was. The evidence that someone had gone through the trouble to declare me dead. Not just legally, but symbolically. This wasn't for mourning. This was to erase. I dropped to my knees, not from grief, but from the insult, the audacity. I traced the letters, my fingertip catching in the grooves. Cold, unforgiving. "You lied," I whispered to no one. "You erased me." The trees didn't answer, neither did the sky. I sat there for minutes, or maybe an hour. Time collapsed around me. In that moment, I wasn't a grown woman. I was that little girl again, the one who stood in the corner of her sister's birthday party, holding a dollar store balloon while everyone clapped for Isolde as she blew out her candles on a cake so big it needed its own table. I remembered that day vividly. I'd asked our mom, just once, why I didn't have my own cake. Her answer came fast, sharp. Because today isn't about you. Now hush. Let your sister enjoy her day. That kind of lesson sticks. It teaches you how to shrink. I was 10 the first time I realized love came in selective packages in our house. Mine was always pending later, or not quite deserved. Isolde was the face of our family, the one people wanted to photograph, the one who didn't mess up, the one who could do no wrong. And I was the echo in every room she left. I left the cemetery only when the wind picked up. I walked for half a mile before I realized I hadn't said goodbye, not even to the fake version of me that lay under that stone. Instead, I said nothing. I didn't cry. I'd already done that. I went back to the motel room I was renting off I-95. Small, quiet, clean enough to feel like a pit stop and not a punishment. The walls were thin and the air smelled like detergent. I dropped my backpack on the floor and collapsed onto the bed without bothering to remove my shoes. My phone buzzed once. I ignored it. Instead, I opened the old email account I hadn't touched in years, one I'd used back in high school, a place where digital dust had collected. The inbox was mostly junk, until I saw a name that made my heart lurch: Jenny Compton. We hadn't spoken since graduation. She was sweet, kind, one of the few people who never treated me like a shadow of my sister. The subject line read, "I saved this for you." I clicked it. Inside was a single line of text. "I don't know if you want to remember, but I thought you might need this one day. You deserve to remember the truth." Attached was a video. I opened it with hesitation that turned quickly into a throb. It was my 7th birthday. The camera shook slightly as it zoomed in on a living room decked out in cheap pink streamers. A crowd of kids shouted and played in the background. And there I was, sitting on the floor in a polka dot dress, clapping along as Isolde opened presents meant for me. My mom's voice echoed off camera. "Don't give her the big cake. It'll look weird in the pictures. Let Isolde hold it." I paused the video. My hands curled. It had never been about oversight. It was always intentional. The kind of intention that slices in places you don't see until you bleed out years later. I played the video again, not to torture myself, but because I needed to see it with adult eyes, not as a daughter, but as a witness. I scribbled into my notebook. "Fire grave inheritance truth," underlined each one. This wasn't just a family problem anymore. It was a case. Something in my stomach clicked. I didn't feel like a victim. I felt equipped. I opened a search engine and checked bus schedules. There was one leaving for Savannah the next morning, early. No questions. Cash accepted. I clicked reserve. When the confirmation loaded, I leaned back in my chair and whispered to the dark, empty room, "If they can pretend I'm dead, I can pretend I'm invisible." The bus hissed to a halt as the sun dipped behind the skyline. I stepped off slowly, shoulders hunched beneath the weight of my worn hoodie, suitcase rolling quietly beside me across the cracked sidewalk. Savannah hadn't changed much, still charming from a distance, still dressed in brick and moss and hospitality. But underneath? Still hiding things. I didn't take the main route back. I wandered side streets and back alleys, letting muscle memory guide me. Every corner held a phantom, laughter from another life, tension from dinners where I spoke too softly, too late, or not at all. I checked into a studio on the east edge of town. The building wasn't new, but it was clean, furnished, paid in cash under the name Caroline Hall. The landlord didn't ask questions. He just nodded and handed me the key, already glancing past me to his TV in the background. The apartment smelled like bleach and old leather, a twin bed, a coffee table, a kitchenette. It was all I needed. That night, I sat cross-legged on the bare mattress, staring at the ceiling. I hadn't told anyone I was back. I hadn't said a word out loud since stepping off the bus. I needed silence, to think, to watch. The next morning, I walked. No phone, no ID, just a baseball cap pulled low and sunglasses that covered enough to make me forget myself. I walked past the coffee shop where I used to study, the park where Isolde took her perfect photos, and finally, our old street. The house stood just as I'd remembered it, at least in shape, but the color was wrong. The porch had been repainted in cheerful tones, and the windows wore brand new shutters. The lawn was trimmed. There were flower beds now, a bird feeder. It wasn't just renovated, it was reinvented. Everything about it said, "We're doing just fine." No scorch marks, no boarded-up windows, no reminders, just a fresh door where mine had once caught fire. I paused across the street and stared, invisible in plain daylight. A man walked out the front door, young, trim, carrying a gym bag. He got into a sedan and drove off without noticing me. Isolde had moved in, kept the house, made it hers. I pulled out a small notebook from my jacket and added one more line to the list: house title. That afternoon, I headed downtown to the county clerk's office. The building hadn't changed, still the same creaky floors and stale coffee smell. The clerk at the records counter didn't blink when I handed over my request. "Looking up inheritance documentation for this property," I said, sliding her the address. "Doing a case study for law school." She nodded and typed, "You a student?" "Alumni. Just curious." The woman returned with a sealed file in a paper sleeve. "This one's old, but it's public record," she said. "Want a copy?" I nodded. I didn't open it until I was seated in a corner booth at a diner down the block. With my coffee growing cold in front of me, I spread out the pages. There it was, my grandmother's will. Clear, notarized, dated. She'd left the property to me, specifically me, not to the children, not to Vera, just me. But the next document? A voluntary release of claim form, signed by me, except it wasn't. The handwriting wasn't mine. The witness signature? Isolde. The date? 2 weeks after the fire. They'd filed it while I was still unconscious. I stared at the signature for a long time. It wasn't even a good forgery. I took photos of every page. Front and back, date stamps, official seals. Back in my studio that night, I uploaded them into a new digital folder labeled Stolen, Phase 1. The next day, I walked across campus pretending to be just another face. My university ID had long expired, but nobody asked. I headed to the alumni archives, smiled at the receptionist, and said I was working on a post-grad portfolio cleanup. She barely looked up. I navigated the database quickly, searching under my name. Then I tried under Isolde's. There it was, my senior thesis. My name was gone. Hers was on the front page. The professor listed as her advisor was mine. I walked to the department building and found his office, a small man with tired eyes and a bookshelf that tilted from too much use. "Hi," I said, poking my head in. "You taught comparative social frameworks 6 years ago?" He looked up. "I did. Are you in that cohort?" "Sort of." I handed him a printed copy of the thesis. "Do you remember who wrote this?" He squinted. "That's Isolde Brooks, right? I remember she turned something in late. There was a fire in the family, I think." "Did she write this?" He hesitated. "I couldn't say for sure. A lot of that year was blurry. Everyone was stressed." "She submitted it 2 months after I was hospitalized." He blinked. "You?" I nodded once. He didn't say anything else. I left quietly, back to the sidewalk where a breeze had picked up, carrying that same southern perfume, magnolia and guilt. At the coffee shop around the corner, I laid everything out. Email records, photos of the will, screenshots of Isolde's blog entries about resilience and rising from grief, all while wearing clothes she'd once borrowed from me, smiling in a house that wasn't hers, giving interviews about overcoming trauma. There were donation links at the bottom of the posts to support women who've suffered family loss. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I opened my notes again and renamed the document. They didn't just move on. They took everything. I wasn't just a missing piece of their story. I was replaced. By the time the sun began to set, I was still in that corner, typing furiously, compiling documents, mapping a timeline. Every minute I stayed silent gave them more time to control the narrative. But I wasn't just collecting facts. I was preparing evidence. I walked back to my studio slowly, the weight of the plan heavier than my coat. Back inside, I pulled up a secure browser, heart pounding just enough to make me feel awake again. I clicked into a site that specialized in background searches, quiet, encrypted, thorough. I typed in Isolde's full name, then Vera's, then the lawyer who handled the property transfer. My hand hesitated. Then I whispered aloud, as if naming it gave it breath. Let's see who else helped bury me alive. The next morning, sunlight leaked through the blinds in dull streaks across the studio floor. I hadn't slept. The glow of my laptop screen had lit the room all night, cycling through names, court documents, financial records. But it was one name in particular that held my eyes and twisted my stomach. Kenneth Doyle. I stared at it again, double-checked, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something innocent. He wasn't just our family lawyer. He'd been around since I was a kid. Tall, soft-spoken, the kind of man who always wore a tie clip and called me sweetheart when I was 7. He handled the estate when my grandfather died, showed up at birthday parties, even sent a card when I graduated high school. So why was he listed on over 40 cases involving emergency inheritance transfer agreements, most of them involving elderly women, people who'd disappeared, or relatives declared unfit? That wasn't a coincidence. That was a pattern. I took a long shower, dressed in plain jeans and a gray sweater, and caught a rideshare to the Savannah County Legal Archives. The building was tucked into an older part of town, red brick with fading signage, a place most people forgot existed unless they had something to hide. I walked through the front door, clipboard in hand, posture straight. "Hi there," I said to the woman at the reception window. "I'm a grad student from Charleston Law, doing a research paper on legal ethics in estate transitions, hoping to pull public records on a few historical cases." The woman raised an eyebrow. "You brought ID?" "Sure did." I slid her a student ID. It was fake, but good enough. Laminated. Scanned. "No typos. Go ahead to the microfilm room. Records clerk will meet you there." "Thank you." It took almost an hour to locate the files I was looking for. A clerk named Tom helped me load them onto a rolling cart and left me alone in the back corner to review them. There he was again. Doyle. In each file. Same signature. Same formatting. The same pattern. Someone had voluntarily renounced their claim to property or inheritance. Always witnessed by someone the family knew, never the person themselves. I pulled out my own file again and laid it on the table beside the others. Mine wasn't an outlier. It was part of the scheme. Back at the studio, I scanned every page, dropped them into folders on my hard drive labeled by year and name. I made copies. Then I opened the document that started it all, my so-called renunciation of inheritance form. Still not my handwriting. But the witness signature, that was real. Callista M. Bennett. My best friend since 6th grade. Maid of honor at my would-be wedding before everything fell apart. The one person I thought had stayed neutral after the fire. I hadn't talked to her in years. Not since the hospital. She never called. Never replied to my texts. I'd assumed she'd disappeared out of guilt. But now I knew better. She didn't disappear. She cashed out. That night, I stayed up tracking her down. She hadn't left town. She'd just moved up. Callista ran her own PR firm now. Sleek, professional, all over LinkedIn. Her bio bragged about clients in the real estate and legal sectors. One photo showed her shaking hands with Kenneth Doyle at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. I booked a consultation under a fake name and company. The next afternoon, I walked into her office at precisely 2 o'clock, clutching a cheap leather folio and a list of made-up branding needs. Callista looked up from her desk and froze. I didn't say a word. Her smile faltered. She stood slowly, smoothing down her blazer like the fabric might buffer her nerves. "Well, this is unexpected." "Hi, Cal," I said, sitting down before she offered. "Let's call this a check-in." "I thought you—" She trailed off. "I mean, I didn't know you were in town." "I didn't advertise it." A pause. "You look, well," she said, forced. You look richer than I remember, I replied, glancing around the room. She didn't laugh. I know why you're here, Meg. Do you? You're mad. Mad doesn't quite cover it. She sighed and sat down, keeping her hands folded tightly on the desk. I didn't think you'd survive, she admitted, voice soft. I let that sit. You signed it, I said. You witnessed a forged document. You handed over my inheritance like it was leftover cake. Callista closed her eyes for a second, then opened them again. I was scared. Vera said it was best for everyone, that you'd been unstable. That if the money stayed in your name, it could be challenged later. So you sold me out to keep things neat. No, she said quickly, but her face said otherwise. They said you were dead, Meg. But I wasn't, and you knew it. I didn't know for sure. You never called to check. She stared down at her lap. I leaned in. How much? Her eyes flicked up. What? How much did they pay you to pretend I wanted to give up everything? I don't remember the exact amount. Try. She hesitated. 10 grand, maybe 15. I exhaled slowly. That's all it took? To erase a decade of friendship? She shook her head. It wasn't like that. It's exactly like that, Callista. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. But you might be the first to help me fix it. What does that mean? It means you're going to tell me everything. On record. Her mouth dropped open. Why would I do that? Because if you don't, I'll take what I already have, your name on a forged legal document, and make it public. This firm, your fancy reputation, your LinkedIn profile, it'll be gone before Friday. She paled. I won't go to jail, she whispered. You might not. But your career? It's already on life support. She swallowed hard, looked around like the walls were closing in. And if I help you, what then? Then maybe, just maybe, you can sleep a little easier. I pulled out my phone, tapped record, and set it on the desk. She stared at it for a beat, then she started talking. By the time I left the office, I had 10 minutes of confession. Names, dates, conversations, my first real piece of leverage. Walking back to the studio that evening, the streets looked different, less like memories, more like opportunities. Callista had betrayed me, and now she'd helped me. Back in my room, I set the phone beside my laptop and hit play, listening to her voice echo through the speakers, shaky but clear. I scrolled through the file folders I'd created and whispered to myself, if I can flip Callista, I can flip them all. The courthouse clerk didn't even blink when I made the request. Property file for 1046 Maplewood Drive, I said. Civil interest. Ongoing dispute. He nodded and stepped away to retrieve the documents, no questions asked. I had driven straight from Callista's office to the courthouse, skipping lunch, wired from the adrenaline of watching her confess. I still had her voice playing in my mind, shaky, remorseful, cornered. But more than anything else, it was useful. Finally, I had something that spoke louder than memory. The clerk returned with a manila folder and handed it over. I signed the logbook and walked back out into the sunlight, flipping through the pages as I made my way toward the car I'd rented. The form was there again, my forged signature, the notarization, Kenneth Doyle's seal, everything neat and legal, everything false. But this time, I wasn't going to bury my rage. I was going to use it. I parked a block down from Vera's flower shop. The window display looked seasonal. Autumn wreaths, faux pumpkins, a sign that read, Family starts with love. My fingers curled around the car's steering wheel. Family starts with convenience, you mean? Inside, it smelled like roses and eucalyptus, the same scent I used to fall asleep to as a child when Mom brought home leftovers from arrangements. The bell above the door gave its usual hollow chime. She turned from behind the counter, pruning shears in hand. At first, I saw the confusion in her face, then the realization. The blood drained from her cheeks. She gripped the edge of the counter as if she needed it to stay upright. Meg? Her voice was barely a whisper. But, you thought you buried me. I cut her off. Don't act surprised I dug myself out. The air thickened between us. Her hands trembled as she set the shears down and picked up a white lily. She started snipping the stem like nothing had happened. Her mask settled back into place. You've always been so theatrical, sweetheart, she said, voice softer than it had any right to be. We did what we thought was best. I stepped forward, pulled the copied document from my purse, and slid it across the counter. This, I said, isn't my handwriting. She didn't touch it, didn't even glance at it. You signed it. So did Callista. That's not something you can sweep away with a bouquet and a warm smile. Her tone cooled. What is it you want, Meg? She asked, finally meeting my gaze. A payout? An apology? Some spotlight you never earned? I want the truth, I said evenly, and I want you to feel what it's like to be cornered. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're unstable, she said, voice raised slightly now. You've always been unstable. The panic attacks, the crying spells, I covered for you. I kept our family from falling apart trying to handle your drama. I didn't set myself on fire, Vera, I snapped. The name startled her. I'd never called her anything but Mom before. You did, I said. You locked me in that room. And when I didn't die, you did the next best thing. You erased me. She picked up the lily again, hands shaking now. People won't believe you, she said. You were broken long before that fire. I reached into my bag again and pulled out a small Bluetooth speaker, placed it gently on the counter and pressed play. Isolde's voice filled the room. It was from the live stream, the one she had done months after my disappearance, her own words tossed carelessly to her thousands of followers. Life got quieter when she was gone. I finally had room to breathe. Vera's face paled. I stopped the recording, let the silence crash over her like a wave. Still, she didn't speak. I pulled out the next item, a photo of the back door from our old house, the new lock, the one that opened only from the outside. I laid it next to the document, making sure her eyes met every piece of evidence I brought. You might have rewritten the story, I said, but I've kept the receipts. You think this is enough? She said, voice brittle. You think playing detective gives you some moral high ground? No, I replied, but it gives me leverage. I turned to leave. Meg, she called out, voice shaking now. Don't do this. I stopped at the door. One more lie, I said without looking back, and I go to the press. Outside, the air was crisper than before. My breath came in slow exhales, fogging slightly in the late afternoon chill. I walked slowly, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to remember how it felt to leave her standing there, powerless for once. At the edge of the street, a little girl crouched beside the curb, picking daisies from a crack in the sidewalk. She looked up and smiled at me. That smile hit harder than anything Vera had said, not because it reminded me of her, but because it reminded me of me, of the child I used to be, the one who never received smiles like that from the people who should have given them freely. I smiled back. Soft, honest, a kind of kindness I hadn't had a lot of. By the time I returned to the studio, the sun had dipped behind the buildings. The light through the blinds was orange and fading. I dropped my bag on the couch, turned on the lamp, and pulled out my phone. The contact at the courthouse answered on the second ring. I need access to full property records, I said, and a clean chain of title for 1046 Maplewood. Meg? The voice said, surprised. I thought you... I know what people thought. That's why I'm fixing it. A pause. What's this about? It's about a lie that's been allowed to live too long, I replied. And one more thing. Yeah? Prepare for a potential civil suit. Isolde was already on her second glass of Merlot when her phone buzzed again. She had ignored the first call, then the voicemail, but the name flashing across the screen now made her blood freeze. Callista. Not answering. Instead, she swiped open the voicemail left earlier, the one she hadn't had the courage to listen to until now. Her manicured finger hovered for a second. Then, play. You need to hear this. Meg's alive. She has proof, and she's not afraid of you. The message ended. She stood, wineglass still in hand, and hurled it against the far wall. The glass shattered across the tile floor, red streaks running down the beige. She paced the room, heel clicks sharp against marble. "Damn it," she muttered, grabbing her phone again. She called Vera. No greeting, just panic. "She was supposed to disappear. We agreed. You told me it was handled." Vera's voice came low and tense. "Calm down. We knew this was a risk. Contain her. Control the story. Do not panic. That's when they win." "She's already winning," Isolde hissed. "Callista's panicking. I think she gave her something." Vera paused. "Then make sure she remembers who's in charge." The line went dead. Isolde sat down, heart hammering. She scrolled to Callista's name and typed, "You better not have talked. You know what's at stake. I mean it." Then she tossed the phone across the couch and stared out the window of her high-rise apartment where downtown Savannah glowed in artificial calm below. Meanwhile, I was getting dressed. It had been 3 years since I'd stepped on campus. The last time I was here, I was burnt, bandaged, and fading from everyone's memory. Today, I was returning as something else, something they didn't expect to survive. A professor who once supervised my thesis had reached out. He'd seen my name on a grant submission form and recognized it. Said I should come by a small community leadership event they were hosting on campus. He'd even left me a pass at the gate. I hadn't RSVP'd, but I had printed a copy of that fake thesis, now under Isolde's name, and tucked it into my bag, just in case. The event was already underway when I arrived. Small stage, rows of folding chairs, catered lunch trays picked clean. I stayed to the side, blending in, watching. That's when I saw her. Isolde, perfectly dressed in deep navy. Hair done in effortless waves. Her heels were too tall for a college lawn, but she glided across it like it was a runway. People clapped when her name was called. She took the stage with a modest smile that made my skin crawl. "And our final award," the MC said, holding a glass trophy, "goes to a woman who has exemplified resilience, grace, and leadership in the face of personal tragedy." I felt the bile rise before I even heard it. "To Isolde Brooks." Applause erupted. I stepped forward, just enough for her to see me from the stage. Her eyes locked onto mine, and widened. The smile faltered. A flicker of recognition. Panic. She recovered fast. Took the mic. "It's a privilege," she began, "to turn grief into growth. My sister's passing changed me, made me stronger, and today I dedicate this to her." I was already walking, toward the stage, toward the mic. I didn't care who was watching. "Excuse me," I said loud enough for the first few rows to turn. The MC stepped toward me, trying to intercept, but I raised a hand. "I just have a question," I said, eyes still on Isolde. "How does it feel to win an award built on a corpse you never had the decency to bury?" Gasps. She froze. I took the mic, calmly. "Funny how awards mean so little when stolen," I said, "especially from someone you assumed was dead." Silence. "Enjoy the applause, sis," I added. "It might be your last." I handed the mic back and walked off the stage without looking back. By the time I reached my motel that night, adrenaline had faded into unease. The room felt colder than usual. I set down my bag, reached for my laptop, and froze. The lock was broken. I stepped in slowly. The window was slightly ajar, curtain flapping in the breeze. I scanned the space. Nothing looked destroyed, but it didn't have to be. I opened my bag. The flash drive was gone. I sat down, tried the laptop anyway. Well, files were missing. But not everything. I'd already backed up the most important stuff to the cloud. Still, this was a message, and it was underlined a few minutes later when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Back off, or we finish what we started." I stared at it for a moment, then smiled. That night, I uploaded a video to an unlisted YouTube channel. Just 10 minutes. A quiet explanation. A timeline. No names mentioned, yet, but clear, concise, and full of just enough proof to rattle cages. Then I sent the link to a local journalist, the same one who had covered the fire 5 years ago. Subject line, "You missed a body." I also included Callista's confession, only the relevant parts. No need to bury her, just enough to light the fuse. By morning, the video was trending among Savannah's local circles. Not viral, but enough to get attention. Isolde's name began popping up in comments. Callista's firm was tagged. And Kenneth Doyle. He issued a statement saying he had no knowledge of any misconduct. The damage wasn't done, but it had begun. Then came the email. No subject, just a single line. You'll regret waking the dead. I didn't flinch. I closed the laptop, leaned back in the chair, and whispered to no one. Only if they come back stronger than me. I read the email again, then hit delete. My hands didn't tremble this time. Whoever sent the threat wanted me shaken, silenced. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I wasn't the one begging for air behind a locked door. That same morning, I stopped by the courthouse postbox I'd been using under an alias. The small metal door squeaked as I opened it, and inside sat a single thick envelope. The return address was from a law office in Atlanta. My breath caught for half a beat when I saw the handwriting across the front. I knew that handwriting. For Meg, in case they try to take everything. I walked out to the steps, sat on the cold stone, and opened it right there. The letter was written by my father, Elias. The man I'd been told left us when I was a toddler. The man whose absence had been used as evidence that I was unlovable, unwanted. But the pages in my hand told a different story. His words were careful, detailed, and trembling with urgency. He knew. He'd seen what Vera was doing. He wrote of her debts, her lies, her manipulations. He wrote about the way she had singled me out as the problem child to cover her own mistakes. And he warned that if anything ever happened to him, if I ever found myself isolated, I should use what he left me. Tucked behind the letter was a storage unit key and a typed list of account numbers. My father had anticipated the storm long before it struck. I sat frozen, reading each line twice, 3 times. It wasn't grief that flooded me. It was clarity. Later that afternoon, I drove across town to the address he'd written. The storage facility looked ordinary. Rows of corrugated metal doors, a bored attendant behind a desk. I signed in under the name listed, and the man handed me a clipboard. Unit 17B, he said. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old paper. A wooden trunk sat against the back wall. I knelt, slid the key into the lock, and lifted the lid. Originals of my grandmother's will. A stack of family photos, me on my father's shoulders, me helping my grandmother knead biscuit dough, me in a dress I remembered loving but hadn't seen in decades. At the bottom, a small digital recorder wrapped in cloth. My chest tightened as I pressed play. Vera's voice, Isolde's voice, clear, whispered but sharp. She'll never let go, Isolde said. Then we make sure she has no choice, Vera replied. Meg was always in the way. I closed my eyes. My father had heard this. He'd recorded it. And now, so had I. By evening, I was seated across from a lawyer in a quiet office 2 blocks from the courthouse. A woman in her 40s, sharp eyes behind simple glasses. She'd reviewed everything I brought, methodical and careful. You have enough to open a civil suit, she said finally. And if we can authenticate that recording, possible grounds for a criminal complaint as well. They'll fight, I said. They'll fight dirty, she corrected. This will be public. You'll be painted as unstable, vindictive. Are you ready for that? They already burned me once, I said. What's left to fear? Her expression softened. She nodded. Then let's build your case. The next week was a blur of scanning, filing, and organizing. Every night I arranged documents in chronological order, building a chain of evidence. Every morning I met with her team, crafting a timeline that was airtight. But word must have traveled faster than we expected. Because 2 weeks later, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Vera. She stood there, smaller than I remembered. Her hair was grayer, her eyes rimmed with red. She clasped her purse with both hands like it was a lifeline. Meg, she said softly, please, can we talk? I didn't invite her in. You shouldn't be here, I said. Her voice trembled. We can fix this. We'll give you your part back. Quietly. No lawsuits, no headlines, just drop it. I studied her face. For years I'd begged for scraps of her approval. Today I saw nothing but calculation in her eyes. "You can't bargain with ghosts," I told her. Her lips parted, as if she might cry. But I saw no tears. Only fear. I closed the door before she could speak again. The next morning, I dressed carefully. Blazer, dark slacks, nothing dramatic, just steady. I packed the folder into a locked briefcase, every page neatly tabbed. I walked the courthouse steps slowly, deliberately, each one echoing louder than the last. Inside the lobby, I paused, taking in the weight of the moment. My heart didn't pound this time. My hands didn't shake. This was no longer about surviving. It was about reclaiming. I tightened my grip on the folder and whispered to myself, low but certain, "Today I stop being your secret. Today I become your consequence." The wooden bench beneath me was colder than I expected. I sat upright, my hands steady on the briefcase resting against my lap. The bailiff called the room to order, and I lifted my chin, eyes landing across the aisle. Isolde sat surrounded by her legal team, immaculate as ever in her tailored suit, hair swept into perfect waves. When she noticed me, her lips curved into a smirk, a familiar mask she'd worn since childhood whenever she thought she'd won before the game even began. Beside her, Vera kept her head low, fingers clutching a tissue she hadn't used. She wouldn't look at me, not once. I smiled faintly, not for them, but for myself, because they didn't know what I had brought with me. The judge entered. We all stood. Then came the call. Civil hearing, case of Brooks versus Brooks, with potential referral for criminal consideration. The room quieted, the hum of whispered speculation thinning into tense silence. Isolde's attorney rose first, a man slick in tone and in appearance. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and began. "Your Honor, my client has endured years of harassment. The plaintiff is emotionally unstable, carrying trauma from an accident that occurred 5 years ago. This case is nothing more than speculation fueled by grief, jealousy, and a desire to destroy reputations. We move to dismiss." He sat with a flourish, like he'd already sealed the coffin. My lawyer stood, calm, unhurried. She adjusted her glasses and looked directly at the judge. "We won't waste the court's time arguing over speculation," she said evenly. "We'll let the evidence speak for itself. More specifically, let the video speak." My pulse didn't spike. It slowed, settled, because this was the moment I'd been preparing for since the night smoke nearly stole my lungs. The bailiff wheeled out a monitor. My lawyer clicked a remote, and the screen came alive. The courtroom leaned forward. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. A timestamp in the corner. December 24th, 2019, Christmas Eve. The camera faced the backyard of our old house. The light was dim, but a figure came into view. Isolde. She moved across the yard with purpose, holding a canister in her right hand. She bent down beneath the back window, my window, and poured liquid in slow arcs. A moment later, a faint voice, muffled but undeniable. "She's asleep. This will be fast." Gasps rippled across the room. The screen flickered forward. Flames licked the edges of the frame. The night glowed brighter. Hours later, the same camera caught Vera stepping into view, clutching a folder of papers. She scanned the yard quickly, then hurried off screen. The recording stopped. Silence swallowed the courtroom. Heavy, crushing. Then Isolde broke it. "That's taken out of context!" she burst out, standing so quickly her chair toppled backward. "It was a prank, a bad joke." "Sit down," the judge snapped, gavel striking hard against wood. Vera sagged into her seat, her tissue falling limp onto the table. She looked older in that moment than I'd ever seen her. Behind them, Callista, brought in under subpoena, stood suddenly, face pale. Without a word, she slipped quietly out the back of the courtroom. She knew. Everyone did. The judge turned to me. "Ms. Brooks, do you have anything you'd like to say before we continue?" I rose slowly. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't waver. "For years," I began, scanning the room, "I believed I was the problem. I believed every cruel word that told me I was less, that I was a burden, that I wasn't worth saving. I turned my gaze directly to Isolde. But I wasn't the problem. I was the reminder you couldn't silence. And you tried. You tried to lock me away, to burn me out of existence, to bury me under lies and paperwork. But I lived. I let that hang. And now, I said, quieter but stronger, the truth lives too. The judge nodded once, face stern. This court finds sufficient evidence to rule in favor of the plaintiff in the civil claim. Furthermore, we are recommending referral to the district attorney for criminal charges of attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. The gavel struck again. Chaos followed. Reporters scribbled. Cameras clicked. The bailiff moved forward as the judge ordered Isolde taken into custody. She fought, shouting, her voice shrill and breaking. "This isn't justice. She's insane. The bailiff snapped cuffs around her wrists. Vera didn't resist. She slumped back, face gray, as whispers spread like wildfire. Fraud. Obstruction. Everything she'd built was crumbling. As for me, I walked. Out of the courtroom. Down the long stone steps that led to the street. The air outside felt clearer than it had in years. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved forward, voices layered over each other, questions hurled like stones. "What do you call this moment?" one reporter asked, his pen poised above his pad. I paused, looked straight ahead. "Justice," I said, my voice steady. "Justice. In progress." 6 months after the verdict, the courthouse no longer loomed large in my mind. The buzz had faded. Reporters had moved on to newer scandals. The public's appetite for drama had been satisfied, for now. But while their noise faded, my own life was just starting to hum again. On a warm spring evening, I stood at the podium of the local recovery gala, adjusting the microphone. The room was full. Doctors, burn survivors, donors, therapists, volunteers. Faces I'd never seen, and ones I now couldn't imagine my life without. Behind me was the banner for my new foundation, Ashes to Life. 43 people. That was the number we'd helped in just under 5 months. Burn victims who didn't know where to go after discharge. Women escaping abusive homes. A father who ran back into a fire to save his daughter. I wore a simple dress, my hair pinned back. But I left the small scar on my neck uncovered, the one I used to conceal with scarves and foundation. Now, I chose to let it show, not out of defiance, out of truth. This, I told the crowd, is not about survival. It's about reclamation. I looked out across the tables. A woman in her 40s nodded slowly, hand resting on her daughter's shoulder. An older man in a wheelchair gave a thumbs up. "We don't just rise," I said, voice stronger. "We build something new, from the fire, not despite it, but because of it." Applause followed, not thunderous, but deep, connected. After the dinner, as people mingled and the string quartet began its final set, a girl approached me, 16 maybe. Scars across her arms and side of her face, faded, but there. She walked with a quiet nervousness, her hands knotted in front of her. "Hi," she said. "I'm Layla." "Hi, Layla," I smiled. "Thank you for coming." She looked down. "I didn't think anyone would ever get it, not the burns, but the part where people treat you like a mistake, like you should have just not made it." My throat tightened. "I get it," I said. She looked up, eyes misty. "I read about your story, not in the papers, the one you wrote, on the website, about how you kept getting up, even when no one wanted you to." I opened my arms and she fell into them, sobbing. Her whole body shook, and I just held her. "I didn't need to survive alone," I whispered. "Neither should you." Later that night, after the gala ended and the chairs were folded and the string lights dimmed, I sat quietly with my board, wrapping up thank you notes and talking next steps. It was quiet, peaceful. And then I drove home. On my way in, I passed the mailbox and paused. Just a habit now. Once a week, I checked for a letter I knew wouldn't come. Nothing. Again. No apology from Vera. No handwritten card. Not even a blank envelope with initials. And strangely, that silence didn't sting anymore. because I didn't need it. Sometimes the healing doesn't come from hearing, "I'm sorry." Sometimes it comes from knowing you no longer crave it. Vera had been sentenced to house arrest. No prison, just public humiliation. Her shop closed within a month of the trial. Local papers printed just enough for her name to be whispered in coffee shops and never mentioned at church again. Isolde. State prison. Her influencer accounts wiped. Her final post was a one-line caption under a blurry photo from years ago. Family means nothing without truth. She didn't get to control the narrative anymore. And Callista? She released a public apology and quietly resigned from her PR firm. Last I heard, she was working part-time, consulting for non-profits, trying maybe to rebuild. As for me, I was dating someone. His name was Owen. He wasn't flashy. Didn't flinch when I forgot to laugh at jokes or took a beat too long to answer questions. He asked before touching me. He didn't press when I chose quiet over sharing. We weren't married. We hadn't even talked about it. But he showed up, with groceries, with patience, with warmth. My therapist once said, "You didn't just break the cycle, Meg. You wrote a whole new blueprint." I didn't know about that. But I knew I was no longer surviving. I was living. 2 weeks after the gala, I returned to the cemetery, not the old one, the new one, where the fake grave had once stood, Margaret Eliza Brooks, 1989 to 2019. There was now a plaque, not granite, not marble, simple wood. It read, "Here lies who they thought I was. She died, and I lived." I stood there longer than I meant to. The breeze nudged my hair gently across my cheek. The sun sat low in the sky, casting golden warmth across the grass. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just breathed. And when I turned to leave, I didn't look back. Some people think closure is a door slammed shut, but for me, it was simply no longer needing to knock. I walked away, the late afternoon sun warming my shoulders, and in my mind, like a quiet, steady drum, I heard my own voice, certain and calm. Some stories end with fire. Mine began with it. Sometimes the deepest scars don't come from fire. They come from family. Meg's journey wasn't just about survival. It was about reclaiming her truth when no one else would. Have you ever been treated like the villain in your own family story? What would you do if the people closest to you tried to erase you? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. And if you want more real, raw stories that cut deep and heal deeper, subscribe and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss what's next.